thing to do, isn't it? Jesus got to talk to his Father. He got to listen to what his Father had to say about how much his Father loved him, about how much his Father loved us. It was his favorite thing. And he got to tell all of these other people of who he was. Because you know who he is, right? When we listen to the Bible, we get to do the same thing, except for we get to listen to Jesus' voice too. We get to listen to how much he loves us. We get to listen to how much he cares about us and what he did for us. What did he do for us? He died on the cross. Died on the cross to take away our sins so that just like he came to live with us for a little while, we get to live with him forever in heaven. One of the things I want you to remember from this lesson today is that Jesus, more than anything, cherished that time with God because he knew that that time was for us. He wants us to cherish that time with God, to learn, to grow, so that we trust God, so that one day we can spend eternity with him in heaven. It's the most important thing to God. It's the most important thing to us, isn't it? Now, we're going to pray now and ask Jesus to help us remember that. This most important thing he's given us is something that we always cherish. Let's hold our hands. Dear Jesus, we thank you for loving us so much that you came to this earth. Thank you for loving us so much that you gave up that life so that we could live with you forever in heaven. And just as you listened to your Father, help us to listen to you. Help us to trust your voice. Help us to learn from you so that we never forget what we have with you. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, thanks for coming. We'll sit back. We will continue by singing verses 4 through 6 of our hymn. Grace and peace to you from God our Father, from our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. I'd like to show off one of my Christmas gifts. Pretty nice, huh? I got 8 pair of these for Christmas from a good friend because I keep losing all the other 8 pairs. I don't remember where I put them. That's probably because I don't really care about them too much. I buy them for $2 a piece, and I wear them when I need them, and then I just leave them wherever. I suppose if they were more valuable to me, then I might keep track of them. I've heard the suggestion from people very close to me that maybe I should get a chain. Truth of it is, I don't want to have them on me all the time. I just want them when I need them. That's all that these are good for. And so if I lose them, now life goes on. Sometimes we lose things when we're not paying attention. We lose things that aren't truly important to us. And that's okay. But if they are important to us, then it's important to pay attention. It's important not to misplace them. Today we see it's a very curious lesson on many levels. We see Jesus, one instance of Jesus, the one recorded instance of him as a 12-year-old boy. And we see his parents misplace him, or his mother and his stepfather misplace him because they weren't paying attention, but that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is what Jesus was paying attention to, something that is so very valuable and what he teaches us to pay attention to, something that is more valuable to us than anything, our relationship with our Father. Jesus is taking care of our Father's business, of his Father's business, and he teaches us to do the same, to pay very close attention to that which is most valuable to us, so that we might never lose it. We do it for our own good, to strengthen that relationship that we have with our Father. We do it for the good of others, to strengthen our faith so that we might share that faith with the world. And all of this, as we go about our Father's business, we give him glory. Once again, I want to read you this section taken from Luke chapter 2, where we see this beautiful example and encouragement by Christ in his ministry in the temple. Luke chapter 2. Every year, his parents traveled to Jerusalem for the Passover festival. When he was 12 years old, they went up according to the custom of the festival. When the days had ended, as they were returning, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents did not know it. Since they thought he was in their group, they went a day's journey. Then they began to look for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem searching for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. His mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us this way? See, your father and I have been anxiously looking for you." He said to them, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be taking care of my father's business?" They did not understand what he was telling them. He went down with them and came to Nazareth. He was always obedient to them, and his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and with people. This is God's word. Again, I mentioned this is a very curious text, and that there's so many things that are unanswered, and we're going to address some of those in a little bit, but to get caught up in the unanswered questions is not the point. The point is to see what Jesus is doing here. But let's lay the background. It's the Passover festival, and maybe you're familiar with the Passover. This is something that began way back in Egypt, after the 10 plagues that God had sent upon Pharaoh. The last of these plagues, that the firstborn son in every family would die. But you could escape this plague if you were to sacrifice a lamb, a 1-year-old lamb, in place of your son. A beautiful festival in which God spared the lives of his people's children, but also pointed ahead to the day when he would spare humanity by the sacrifice of his lamb. And it was something that they celebrated every year. His parents went up every year, and it says parents, but we know very rightly that his mother, Mary, and his stepfather, though a father in every way except for biologically, one who loved him, one who took care of him, one who cared for him, but he was the Son of God. But he went up with his parents, and this was perhaps the first year where he truly celebrated the Passover as a young man. There was a tradition that still goes on among many called the bar mitzvah. It's a Hebrew word that means the son of the covenant. It's somewhat related to our confirmation, where a boy of this age would learn what God had commanded his people, the laws that he had given to his people, but he would also learn the promises, and he would know them well enough to be able to appreciate what this Passover celebration was. And Jesus was that age, no longer a child, becoming a man, having learned and now beginning to understand the promises of God. So they're celebrating the Passover, and the obvious point of this is how Jesus gets lost. Let's address that very briefly. First of all, this is not Jesus' fault. Later on, Mary suggests that it is, but we know who Jesus is. He is God. He has been sinless from conception to death. This is not his fault. And without pinning the blame on Mary and Joseph, how it might very well have happened is in this large caravan, which they would have taken to Jerusalem for fear of bandits. Picture the Old West, the caravans, protection in numbers. It was very likely that Joseph and Mary, after this celebration, believed that Jesus was with the other. The men would often lead the caravan, the women would often ride back in the wagons, and they probably assumed that Jesus was with the other one, or perhaps with his friends. The long and short of it is that after a day when they make camp, they realize Jesus isn't there. And the panic, I'm sure, begins to set in, and so they go back to Jerusalem. And it's a 3-day search from the moment that they leave Jerusalem to the moment that they find Jesus. And here's where so many questions come into play in my mind, and they're not that important, but as a father who has lost his children from time to time, I imagine this. What do you do? Well, you figure out where would my child go? If there is a Chuck E. Cheese, I didn't make that part up. You've been in an airport, video games, the loud noises, this is where your children gravitate. If it's in a store, it's the toy aisle. You know where your children want to go. And perhaps Mary and Joseph played these scenarios out. Where would he be? Would he be in the marketplace with the other children? Perhaps he went back to the inn where they had stayed, and they looked from place to place to place to place to place. And I bet even Joseph, as things change, they stay the same. Joseph asked for directions. As hard as that is to do, this was important. And so they asked around, and they tried to figure out where Jesus was. And again, after 3 days, they find him in the temple. Last place they looked. And here's where they're frustrated and they're scared, and that fear gets the best of them, and they kind of place it on Jesus. Why did you do this? But it's Jesus' answer that really brings to light the truth of this text. Why were you looking for me? Why was it so hard for you to find me? How did you not know that this is where I would be? Carrying out my Father's business. What was his Father's business? Why did Jesus come to this earth? The obvious answer is to give up his life. To offer up his life as a sacrifice for sin. But that would not happen for another 20 years. And right now, his Father's business was very similar to ours. To grow, to learn, to hear his Father's voice and to be strengthened by it. And where else would he be? For him, it's an obvious question. Where else would he be? Because there's no place he'd rather be than to hear his Father's voice. And again, this brings more questions than I can possibly answer for you. As he's sitting here talking with these teachers of the law, asking them questions, what is he asking? Part of me thinks, oh, it's a shame it's not recorded. But obviously God doesn't need us to know this, and so I won't. But what was he asking? What did he know and what did he not know? Who is Jesus? Jesus is God. And he was the one who put this whole plan together. And yet in becoming man, he took upon himself man's weaknesses and set aside a good amount of that knowledge. What did he know and what didn't he know? I feel it's very safe to assume he knew who he was. Mary and Joseph knew who he was. Simeon and Hannah in the temple, when he was brought to be dedicated, knew who he was. And if he didn't already have that innate knowledge, I'm sure Mary and Joseph told him. But what didn't he know? What did he need to hear? What did he need to learn? What was he asking about? Perhaps he was putting together that puzzle that he had invented, that he had created, putting together the pieces, recognizing that this Passover feast that he had come to, that the people celebrated how God was promising a lamb who would come and sacrifice himself for the sins and eternity of all mankind, was him. Perhaps he was putting together that beautiful Bible story about how Abraham was ready to sacrifice his son, but then God gave a ram who could be sacrificed in his stead, and that was a picture of him. And what he was going to do was going to spare these people. Maybe he was putting all these things together. Maybe he was learning things that he didn't know. But there's something else there too that we don't want to lose sight of. That's hearing the voice of the Father, hearing the voice of God is not always just about learning something new. It's about hearing the voice of someone who loves you very dearly and learning ever more deeply to trust in that. You think of a relationship that we have, father and son. And a son may know his father loves him. When that father is willing to spend time, and to talk, and to share, and to teach, and to say, I love you, then that trust and that love grows. Jesus, where else would he be than listening to the voice of his Father? Learning ever more as a human being to trust that voice. We know that he needed it. Later on in his ministry, he would take that time. He would step away from his disciples for a while just to have time with him and his Father in prayer. Or in the Garden of Gethsemane, he would call upon his Father for help. You don't learn that kind of trust in the dark times. You call upon that trust in the dark times. You depend on that faith in the dark times, but you learn it in the light. You learn it at times like this, as a child, as a young man, hearing the voice of that Father that will sustain you. Jesus was carrying out the work of his Father, being strengthened for himself. And yet there was an obvious result there. There was an obvious byproduct of that, in that asking these questions and answering these questions in this discussion, can you imagine the strength that gave to those around him as they saw the wisdom, as he helped them put the pieces together? Or for his mother and his stepfather, for Mary and Joseph, as they began to put together what was truly important. For Jesus, it was a no-brainer. This is where I need to be. And for them to begin to see this is where they need to be. To listen to the voice of their Father. To hear his love. That was his work. To be strengthened and to strengthen others. And in this story, we see God's glory. Because what do we see? We see a son who is proud of his father. And to you, children, that's great praise. To be proud of your father. To be proud of your mother. To be proud of your God. What greater praise is that? And this is what Jesus shows. But he shows it as an example to us as well. You know, there are things that are important to us and there are things that are not. My glasses, I lose them all the time because I can get them for $2 a piece and I can always buy another one. This is what's important to us. We look about our Father's work, and what is that work? What does God want from us? This question was asked of Jesus. You know, what is the work that God wants us to do? What is it that is supposed to be important to us? In John chapter 6, or in John, it's marked here. In John chapter 6, Jesus says, the work of God is this. John chapter 6, verse 29. The work of God is this, to believe in the one he has sent. To believe in the one he has sent. To trust him. To not let him go. That is what God values more than anything, is that relationship with us, and is what he has every right to expect we will value. And there's really no reason why we wouldn't, because who gains more from this relationship? God or we? Well, we gain everything. We gain a Father who loves us, who sustains us. We gain an eternity with him. There's no greater thing in our life than this relationship with him. And to hear his voice on a regular basis as we study his word, as we gather together here, brings us closer to him. And it teaches us what this world has, or what this world can have. As we get closer to our Father in heaven, we become that light to the world. And as we carry out our Father's business, as we show pride in our Father is glorified. This is the example that Christ sets for us. And we now find ourselves on the doorstep of a new year, time for resolutions. And what are resolutions? Things that I'm going to do differently this year? Well, I believe this. I don't believe we try to do new things. We just work on the things that we know are important. I've already been trying, and I'm going to continue to try. The new year is a time to reinvest ourselves in what is important. And this is important. So what will we do? Reinvest ourselves in the time we spend with our God. Commit ourselves newly to that time with him. If I spend 5 minutes a day with him, maybe make it 10. If I spend 1 day a month at church, maybe make it 2. You make the plan. Let's reinvest ourselves in spending that time with our God so that we can hear his voice and he draws us closer. And when we do, we will be inspired to share that faith and make a plan. Make a plan to speak to your neighbor and say, I would like you to come to church with me. And should they say, I don't know, then tell them why. Tell them why it means something to you. Show them why you're proud, not of your church, maybe you are, but of your God. Because when we live our lives carrying out our Father's work, hearing His voice, showing our pride, it will be a year in which God gets His glory. And may that be our year, where we give Him glory in all that we say, in all that we do, in all how we listen, and how we grow. God grant. Amen. Now may this peace of God, which transcends all human understanding, guard and keep your hearts and minds through faith in Christ Jesus. Amen. Once again, please rise. As we join in singing together, Create in Me.